but now I'll have it on this also. Is it okay with everybody if I put this on YouTube so that other people can see and enjoy it? Yeah, just give me a thumbs up like Shannon did if it's okay with everybody. Jennifer, is it okay with you too, sweetie? Thumbs up. All right. Awesome. All right. So welcome to our very second book study for The Heart of a Mother. I'm really excited that all of you are here. And our moderator tonight, again, is the lovely Sherry Turner. And yes, hi, Sherry. And we are going to get started by having Edie Spears, one of our guest authors, do her presentation.
Okay.
And then we'll get your, whoops. Here we go, Edie.
Well, my story was about finding out in utero, and that the fact that we found out in utero probably made it so that we had Michael live for as long as he did. We were in Salem, Oregon. There's no heart program there, you know, for surgeries. And so he was born in Seattle to be at a children's hospital where his surgeon, Dr. Lupinetti, did the Norwood and the Glenn and the Fontan. And definitely finding out in advance was a precious gift, because I truly don't think he would have lived the first. He crashed 4 hours into his life and had to be intubated in an ambulance. So it was pretty crazy. He was a very sick little guy. And it's funny because the reason that we had the ultrasound was because we had gestational diabetes, and I was measuring really big, and I hadn't gained the extra weight, but I was just measuring super big. So they thought he was going to be a really big baby, and he ended up only being 7 pounds, 10 ounces. So it kind of was fortuitous that happened, because otherwise we wouldn't have had that ultrasound. And so I'm not sure.
Should I go to the
Having
next
Michael,
slide?
what
Here we
now?
go. I'm going to the next slide so we can all see his beautiful little smile.
Yeah, that one on the where he's obviously newborn, and then the one down below catty corner was shortly. Does he have a scar in that one? I can't tell. I think that's
Yes,
before
he
he
does.
he does
Oh,
have the scar.
I can see the scar.
Okay, he was intubated the same day he was born, and he was so sick that touching him was too much stimulation. And so his dad was angry with me, in fact, because we held him the night before his surgery, and he didn't think we should because it was going to set his vitals going crazy. But I wanted to hold my son while he was still alive, and I wanted his father to hold his son while he was still alive. And so I'm grateful we did that. He was okay. He had a rough time. He had an open chest. They couldn't close his chest. His heart was too swollen. His vocal cord was paralyzed. He came home on a duodenal feeding tube that he pulled out twice. He They didn't think he would grow very well. They didn't want me to nurse him, but they said I could try once the feeding tube came out, and he took right to it. And he grew so fast, he had to have his Glenn early. And we thought we'd be having it at like 8 or 9 months, and he had to have it at 5.5 months because he grew he gained about half a pound a week. And he was just a healthy, happy baby. He was a really happy baby, even though he'd been through so much. But then after the Glen, he was a traumatized baby. He came home with PTSD for sure. He got a nurses are a godsend. Nurses are amazing. I love his nurses, and I always will. I would talk with his nurse each night, whoever had him that night, before I went to bed. And one of the nurses that was one of my favorites told me the night before we found out that he seemed a little off. So she decided to do labs. The next day, he vasoconstricted in my arms and had to be packed in ice because he was 107 degrees internally, and he had a bacterial blood infection. And because she'd done the labs the night before, we found out pretty quickly what antibiotics he needed to be on. But because he was on these, he was on two really strong. He was on gentamicin, and I can't remember the other one. They gave him seizures. First, they gave him petit mal seizures, and so they switched the meds, and that gave him grand mal seizures. And so he came home on morphine, Ativan, and phenobarbital, and I had to wean him off one at a time. So when we went back for his last surgery at 18 months old, he had just weaned off the morphine, because that was the last one they weaned him off of. I literally had a baby going through drug withdrawals for a year. So it was pretty rough. And you could tell when he was going through withdrawals, because he would like pull at his skin and cry. And yet all of this time, he was an amazingly happy baby. He was super normal. It was a little delayed with walking and talking, but you could tell that it was all there. He was just taking his sweet time. And he started getting ear infections a few months before the last surgery. And he would get like 105 fevers when he would get these ear infections. And we had planned to have his surgery when he was 18 months old, the Fontan. And I was really worried because he'd been getting these ear infections. And so they did blood work and stuff to check before his surgery. And about a week after his surgery, found out he was sick when he had his surgery. And yeah, it was really rough. I watched him die for 6 weeks, and it was incredibly painful. I watched my poor boy. The last word he ever said to me was "Ma." He didn't even get mama out, just "Ma." And he stopped talking. He went through so much. It was right when the surgeons were bringing in new ones to go through all the rounds and everything. You can see how sick he looks. He stopped eating. I couldn't leave his side. If my mother-in-law had not stayed with me, I don't know what I would have done, because he didn't sleep. I had signs up, "Please don't," because I had a doctor come in and wake him up at 5 o'clock in the morning, just because she wanted to listen to his heart murmur, not because she needed to. She just wanted to. And so it kind of became combative in a way, because I was trying to protect my baby. Sure. And this one doctor, it was just such a piece of work. She actually told me at one point that the nurses hated working with me because I was so difficult. And I was just distraught, because I had such a good relationship with his nurses. And then the one nurse I thought I really got along with, I went and talked to her, and she said, "No, she lied to you. She just wants to control she wants you to do what she wants you to do." And so we had the first 2 experiences, nothing like that. The third experience, this doctor had an ego. And then I found out later they made a mistake during the surgery, but they didn't tell us. And then I found out after we were home, after he was gone, I got an anonymous letter that they knew all along he was going to die, and they just didn't tell us. So it was pretty traumatic. It was pretty awful. I will say 3 of his nurses came in to sit with me the day he died on their days off. Wow. And nothing but love for the nurses, nothing but love. They got us through. They cared about my boy. He was such a precious gift. And I miss him still. It was in 98 that we lost him. And it was kind of hard reading his story all over again, He was funny. His sisters, he was so close to his sisters. And they loved him so much. And he's still just a huge part of our family, even now after all these years. Both of my daughters have sons, and his name was Michael. And one daughter has her son, Isaiah John Michael, and my other daughter has her son, Riker Michael. And yeah, there he is.
I love the cowboy hat. I just love the cowboy hat.
I wanted one where you could see his scar, see his and let him know that we were proud of him.
Mm, yep. Yep. So cute. So I love those two shots.
And yeah, we put a lot of work into that headstone. We designed it ourselves. And we just wanted people to know he was loved. He was special.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
I'm going to stop sharing right now because I can't let people into the room while we're sharing. And I think, and there are 3 people who want to hear what you're saying. Why is this not letting me do this? Oh, I'm afraid we lost somebody left, which I don't blame them, but oh,
I do have a quick note.
yes, you still have
Sadie,
you still have a minute.
okay, Sadie's mom is going to speak tonight, right?
Mhm. Yes.
We actually met her at Seattle Children's Hospital when Michael was there for his last surgery.
Cool.
So she was a good support. I had a lot of support. She was part of our group, our
Thank you,
HLHS.
Edie. Thank you, Edie. It's been a long time since we've chatted.
Yeah.
It's really good to see your face.
Thank you. It's good to see you too.
Yeah.
I remember you too.
Well.
I remember you too. We had some amazing talks. You were such a huge support system for me. That is one thing I have to say. I know we're probably out of time, is that the people from that support group sent cards and gifts, and after he passed away, even money for his expenses. I had someone send me a pastor to pray with me. I had so much support from these people. Heart Warriors parents are amazing. They take care of each other if they can.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sherry, should we go ahead and let everybody do their presentation and then we can do the questions afterwards?
I was just kind of thinking that would probably make sense.
Okay. So nice job, Edie. Nice job. I know it's hard to see those pictures. I got tears in my eyes when Mary and I were going through it earlier today. So
It's so beautiful.
it's you did a beautiful job sending the photos, and Mary did a great job. Thank you, Mary, for actually
Yes, thank you.
putting it into a slideshow. She used Canva and made everything pretty. Okay, so who shall we do next?
No, the next one that I
Oh, I'm sorry.
thought, that's all right. The next one I thought was the right heart for Travis, Don Martin.
Okay. Ready?
All right.
And then
Before I start, I just want to let everybody know I'm recovering from COVID. So if I start coughing a little bit, my apologies, but I feel great. So we're good.
Glad you're getting over it.
Yeah, it was rough. Are we ready?
Just let me start the sharing. And
All right. And so my pictures are more of an updated version so that you guys could see where he is, where he traveled and where he went. But my essay was called The Right Heart for Travis because in the search or the wait for his transplant, that was kind of what we learned, that there would be a lot of false starts. They had warned us, but going back, Travis, different from Edie's story, Travis was not diagnosed in utero. He was actually diagnosed at 2 months of age. So when he was born, he was completely healthy. The duct that's open when babies are born kind of helped to give him some time. And it took a while for his pulmonary pressures to build up to the point that he was symptomatic. He actually didn't really become symptomatic until after he had been admitted to the hospital. So he was 2 months old, and we had moved back to Tennessee, or back to Nashville, to be closer to family, since I had graduated from college the spring before he was born in October, and took him in for a checkup, thinking, oh, he's going to have sore legs this afternoon because he's going to get his first round of shots. And instead, about 3 hours after his appointment, where the pediatrician told me that he had found a murmur, and I said, oh, I had an innocent murmur when I was a baby. And he turned around and looked at me and said, this is not an innocent murmur. And then proceeded to get us an appointment that same day with the head of pediatric cardiology at Vanderbilt Hospital. So pretty quickly, we had the big red flag that our world's about to change right now. And the only indicator besides the doctor hearing the murmur when we first got there was that he was only about 9.5 pounds, and he was almost 8.5 pounds when he was born. So I knew all the new mom stuff that he should probably be about 11 or 12 pounds. And so when he only weighed about 9.5, I knew that something was wrong, but I was just thinking failure to thrive. We'll supplement with bottles, it'll be fine. But clearly it wasn't. So we went to the cardiologist that afternoon. We went and picked up my mother, who joined us for that appointment. She was an RN, so I immediately was thinking I need all hands on deck here to hear what these doctors are going to have to say. So we went to the appointment. They did the echo. They were talking a lot. You know, anytime you've had any kind of diagnostic testing like that, you know, if everything's normal, they just kind of zoom and click and take their pictures, and they don't really say a lot. And they actually had a cardiologist in the room who sat, and she was discussing with the echo tech things that they were finding. Now, clearly it was in language that we didn't understand, but we knew that something was wrong. So once they finished, they put us in another room, and like 3 cardiologists came in, and they were in a big hurry because they had squeezed us in. They didn't have time to see us that day, but our pediatrician had pressed. And so they drew some pictures and kind of explained what was wrong. He had an atrioventricular septal defect with a hypoplastic left ventricle. So he had a huge hole in his heart and the undersized left ventricle. So they explained it to us. I looked at them and said, how do we fix this? What do we do? There's got to be a solution. And the doctor looked me dead in the eye and said, we can't fix this. It's not fixable. And so it kind of left us reeling. And then they said, sorry, we got to go, but they're getting a room ready for him upstairs. And so that was it. He was admitted to the hospital that day. It was probably about 2 or 3 days later. Now, this was on the 22nd of December, so it's just a few days before Christmas. A couple of nights into our hospital stay, I had a dream that of being a young child and being in like a convenience store, like a 7-Eleven, and seeing a jar on the counter for a child that needed, I think it was a kidney transplant or something, and they were raising funds so that they could get this child this kidney transplant. And I woke up and told my husband they're going to want to do a transplant, and I didn't even know if that was something that was done at that point. I just knew that that's the direction that we were headed in, and it was probably another week to 10 days before the doctors and nurses mentioned anything to us about it. Then we had to go through the process of
Raining?
kind of being approved for a transplant. The transplant process is so arduous, the care, the follow-up afterwards, that really we had to go through a gambit of interviews basically with surgeons and with social workers to make sure that we had a support system in place that could support him post-transplant if that were to happen. Doctors' visits were 2 to 3 times a week, and they wanted to make sure there was going to be someone that would be able to take him there. They needed to check on our insurance because the medications were so expensive that he would be on post-transplant. So we kind of felt like we were under the gun to prove ourselves. We were very young. I was only 22. My husband was 24. So we went through that, but even at that point, we were still questioning if this was something that we wanted to do for Travis. My husband and I have always been very aware that there is a lot to be said for quality of life. And so we had a lot of discussions, and clearly at that point, there was no internet for us to check out. There were no resources. There were medical journals, and that was it. And so we talked a lot about what it would mean for him if we made this decision. And I was walking past the playroom. I had heard that there was a child in the hospital who had had a transplant about a year before he was coming in for his biopsy. And I was in the playroom with Travis, and I saw this mom, and I thought I knew who she was. And so I asked after she left the room, I said, was that so-and-so's mom? And the nurse said, yes. And so I actually followed her back to her room and knocked on her door and asked if I could ask her some questions. So that was kind of my first opportunity to get any kind of insight into what life would look like post-transplant. Once I talked to her, we got to talk to another mom, and she, again, kind of allayed some of those fears that he might actually have a shot at a normal life. So we made the decision to go forward, and then we had to wait for the heart that was going to be the best match for him. And they warned us. We had, I think, 2 false alarms before he actually got his heart, where they kind of prepared us. There may be one available. Then they do blood type matching and size. He had very high pulmonary pressure, so he needed a little bigger heart than would have typically been required at his age and size. So finally, on March the 27th, my husband and I were on a date. We had decided about a month into his hospitalization that at least one night a week I would be with him and spend the night at home. And so my dad would come stay at the hospital with him, and he got his heart after midnight, so March the 28th of 93. And he is now 28 years old and is doing amazingly well, and is actually expecting his first child in October. So we are very excited, and he's just great. So.
All right. Let's look at a couple of these pictures, and you can just tell us what's going on in these.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So the first one, he was rollerblading. Travis has never been scared of anything in his life. He does have some anxiety that's from PTSD, but he will try anything and is fearless when it comes to anything that might threaten his safety, which is kind of terrifying, but also very exciting because he has that quality of life. So he was a 3rd-degree black belt in Taekwondo before he graduated from high school. He made the varsity golf team his freshman year of high school. And then, let's see, this was his college graduation. He decided to go to UNLV in Las Vegas to go to college. That's also terrifying. And then in 2017, he married his high school sweetheart. They actually dated through high school, and then broke up to go to college, and came back and said, if our love is real, it'll still be there in 4 years. And it was. And so they're now married. And then this was his first job post-college. He managed an entire restaurant and food service in a major hotel chain. And this is just my little boy all grown up.
Oh my gosh, it happened so fast.
I know, it's crazy.
I feel bad because somebody else wanted to come in. I'm going to need to put a note that if people want to come in, get here a little early, because when we're doing screen sharing, I can't stop and let people in. So sorry to whoever. I'm sorry, whoever wanted to come in, but luckily we can share the video when this is all done. Well, that was beautiful, and I'm so excited to see that he is doing so well. And I know people are going to have some questions for you, but who do we have up next, Sherry?
Next up we have is Jennifer. Hold on a second.
Okie doke.
Jennifer Nachbur.
Nachbur, like knocking on the door and burr.
Okay. Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
With feeding problems.
Yeah, so I wrote a section in Heart of the Mother about feeding problems because my son, Will, who was born on March 7th, 1993, with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, Was in Boston Children's Hospital for 2.5 months, partly because he got a staph infection and had to have a lot of IV antibiotics, but also because he wasn't feeding well. So we went home with a G tube and had to have bolus feedings where we had to have an IV pole in our house and hang the bottles upside down and just get up every 3 hours as if you were going to feed a baby like nursing or with a bottle, but we had to do it through the tube. And then sometimes we would fall asleep and then we'd go back and the thing would have stopped like halfway. And then my husband and I would throw our arms up in the air and say, oh God, it didn't even empty, you know. But that was our routine. He was our first child. We were not young like Dawn was. We were 32 and 36 when we had our first child. And so we just rolled with it. And Will did have a little bit of a complication. He had to get a pacemaker when he was about 2 weeks old. So he'd had his Norwood surgery and he was recovering from that. And then he had rhythm issues. And so just to be safe, they stuck a pacemaker in him. And I'll tell you what, to this day, it has still been a huge pain in our ass to have the pacemaker has eroded through his skin. It's like, well, because in babies, I don't know if anybody else's kids have a pacemaker, but they put it behind a stomach muscle. So in a pocket, and he had it, and then he got it replaced when he was about 7 or 8, I think. But he kept having to get the generator replaced and put in that pocket, and that pocket gave way eventually in his 20s. So that's a whole other story that's not related to anything that I wrote about in the 90s about Will. But anyway, so as you can see here, so he had his 3 stages for his hypoplastic left heart syndrome. I wrote multiple pacemaker surgeries because there have been many. And then he did have a really big revision surgery where they had to like rebuild a lot of stuff, and he had the biggest aorta, he had the biggest why am I blanking on the word for this? It's when the wall of the artery is about to burst. Aneurysm in his heart. It was the biggest one they'd ever seen at Boston Children's Hospital. So Sherry can appreciate that that's probably a pretty big deal. And we live in Vermont, so Boston is a 3.5 to 4 hour drive for us from here. Anyway, but he survived that. That was when he was 20. He's almost 28 now. But we've been through lots of ups and downs. That was him after his Norwood, before he had the bidirectional Glenn, and the feeding tube helped him get nice and chubby. You can see the picture on the right, how much chubbier is than he is on the left, and that's thanks to that feeding tube. And this is preschool. So he went to preschool and he basically stopped using the feeding tube when he was around a little over 1 year old, but he still had that hole and he did get a barred button eventually when he was a baby. So, which is like a little plastic thing that you can close. Well, they pulled the barred button out, and every so often the kid would be at school and like all these gastric juices would fly out of that hole all over his shirt and freak out his preschool teachers and everything. And so we had to have surgery to have that closed up because the scarring had just created such a tract that it wouldn't close up on its own, which is what it was supposed to do. So just to go back to the feeding issue, because I don't know if anybody else had issues with feeding with their kids, but we worked with, in our Department of Health here in Vermont, we have a children with special health needs division, and they had a feeding team there, and we worked with them. And so we worked with an occupational therapist a little bit. Of course, he had PT because he was definitely developmentally delayed as well. But he did end up liking food a lot once he got used to eating it. Milk is still his favorite drink to this day, which is like, because we had to give him like Pediasure forever to like, bump up the calories and everything. He's had a lot of challenges. He's definitely has had the PTSD, lots of anxiety, learning delays, but he loves people, but being able to read cues was always a challenge for him. So he loved preschool and school, but he used to get in everybody's face all the time. And but his family to this day is still the most important thing to him. So I have a brother who's in Colorado. This is my brother's oldest son that we all went on a vacation that year in Wyoming. And he has two, my brother has 2 boys and my other brother has 3 boys. And I have 3 kids. Will's the oldest, obviously. I have a daughter who's a year and a half younger than Will, and a younger son who's about a little less than 2 years younger than Anna. So I basically had 3 kids in 4 years. A lot of people thought I was crazy after having a kid with a heart defect and then having a bunch of kids, but I was 32 when I had my first kid. So I was cranking them out the way I could.
I love this one.
Yeah, this is my youngest brother's 3 boys. And that's my younger son, Sam, who's in Fort Collins, Colorado. I grew up in New Jersey. And so when Sam was a newborn, I started taking my kids down to the Jersey Shore in the summer from Vermont. I always took a babysitter with me, and we went there for many years. So now that's a special place for them. And then the other special place that we go is on my mother's side of the family. We have a house in the Adirondacks near Lake Placid. And that's close to here. It's only an hour-and-a-half drive from here. So that is sort of the family gathering place for the Nachbur family. And my husband's family's from Vermont, and most of them are here. A couple of them are in Florida, retired. So Will I don't know if I'm sure other people's kids did Make-A-Wish, right? Did anybody else do Make-A-Wish?
No, they wouldn't let us.
Yeah, well, I had a friend here Jennifer Sokolowski, who I don't know if anybody's met over the years, but she has a son who's several years younger than Will that is hypoplastic left heart. And she said, I'm on the board, he can still get it before he turns 18. So his senior year of high school, we're like, okay. And that was when the movie The Hangover came out, he loved that movie. So his wish was a hangover wish. And they were like, we've definitely never done anything like this before. There was no alcohol or drugs involved, obviously, but it was at Caesar's Palace. We stayed in like a big room, and he was thrilled. So we did a weird thing though. Instead of the family going, he and I went from here, and then my brother and my nephew came from Colorado, and then his friend who had lived in Vermont, who was living in Reno, came, and we all got together in Las Vegas. And my brother and my nephew were basically like the family, like the 4 of us were the family. So we saw the Blue Man Group, and we went to the Hoover Dam, and we saw, like a movie on the big giant screen, and did lots of great. I just actually, when I was telling Anna I was looking for my book, because I still can't find my Heart of the Mother book, I found the book from Will's Make-A-Wish. It was awesome. You can forward that slide. And then this is his high school graduation in 2011. And then he went to community college for a few years. And then he went to the University of Vermont, and then he was failing out of the University of Vermont. So he took some time off, and he has been working with my husband for several years doing apartment rentals and real estate. But he finally graduated from college, which I don't know if it's the next picture or a couple of pictures later, but this is all 3 of my kids in Switzerland 5 or 6 years ago. And then one more. Yeah. So what we did is he was a December graduate from the University of Vermont, and my nephew was a December graduate from University of Colorado at Denver. So we went to Denver and we celebrated both of them. And that was a pretty special gathering of the family. So.
I love it. Oh my gosh, that is so awesome. Great job. Thank you, Jennifer. Let me see.
So are we going to move on to the next one?
Yes. Hold on. I'm hitting the wrong keys. Hold on 1 second. I don't want to mess this up.
Oh.
Okay. And
I have
the last one. Whoops.
Last one is Supporting Sadie by Holly Scheyer. So did I say that right, Holly?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I just say it's so nice to reconnect with the CHD moms. Some of you who I've known for a long time, and Anna, I really appreciate this. I've been wanting to be involved in your podcast and things, and I just, time one wasn't right. So this is really, really fun. Thank you. So my story was mostly about our experience when Sadie was in the hospital for her Fontan. She was 2 years old, and as you can see in these pictures, she liked the hospital. I mean, she looks happy in that one on the right, but she just, it felt like she grew up in the hospital, and that was her comfort zone. It's kind of funny to think about. And then what do? I become a nurse after all this. So, I felt like I was a nurse while I had her in the hospital. I learned so much, like most of you have said, mostly good experiences with nurses, advocating for the kids, and sometimes knowing much more than the doctors about, the complications that can happen and things like that. So anyways, these pictures are, the one up in the upper left was when she was a month old, I think. Yeah. And then the other ones were within a year, I think 6 weeks. And then the one with her dad, that was one of her hospital visits. And then I think she might be close to a year, maybe 8 months to a year. And the one with me in the snow there. So she's always been a fighter, and I don't know if you guys read my story, but I reread it. It's been a long time. I reread it today, and the things that she said in the hospital, I mean, it totally, that's been her whole life. She's always been outspoken, speaking up for herself and others, and so I think that all started back then. I mean, maybe she was born that way, but I always empowered her to speak up for herself, and she really did. So she's, let's see. So the picture up in the upper left is the 4 generations. So that was her 1-year birthday. So that's with my mom and my grandmother. And my grandmother is now 107, by the way, and has survived COVID. And we're looking forward to going and seeing her when things slow down. And then the one in the upper right is with her best friend, James. And James and Sadie were born in the same year and ended up having surgeries around the same time. And Sadie had a transplant 4 years ago. And so I guess James kind of preceded her in the Fontan, and we learned a lot from him. Well, we preceded James in having to have the transplant. And so they learned a lot from us. Unfortunately, James did not survive the transplant. So that's been really, really hard. And, the connections you make are just so important. And James' mother and I are still very close. I would say best friends. And so Sadie's good support for her name is Debbie, and Debbie's a really good support for Sadie. And I'm really glad we've been able to keep that connection. Sadie had hypoplastic left heart, and she went through, sorry, I will back up. She went through the 3-part surgeries. And then she had also coarctation of the aorta, so she had stents as well. And then it was when she was about 18 that she ended up in heart failure and having to eventually get on the transplant list, which took 2 or 3 years for the process of getting her on the list, and then her being sick enough to have the transplant, but well enough, still well enough to get the transplant. And long story short, she was 21. She got on the list in January of 2017. She fortunately had A positive blood type and no, hardly any antibodies, and was a really good candidate. So she got her transplant 3 weeks later. We were extremely fortunate. These pictures are her wearing her hospital gown that my grandmother and my mom made for her. I wanted a gown that would have Velcro at the top, so it'd be easy to take on and off, and then have it match her doll's gown. So they put that together for us, and it was really comforting. We prepared really well for the Fontan. We did this. We had a recording of music and families talking to her so she could listen to something during her surgery, because we thought that the reason she was afraid of loud noises like the blender and the vacuum was, stress, post-traumatic stress from surgeries. So the social worker was the one that suggested we make that recording. And she came out of that surgery and out of recovery talking about the things we were talking on that tape. So I know that even though they're not, conscious during surgery, they can still hear. So I've always thought that was a good thing to tell people that we're headed for this kind of surgery. And then this is our family. So Sadie's the oldest granddaughter, and there she is in the aqua, holding the youngest, who's Finn, and then other cousins, and that's my son standing above Sadie. My mom and my dad are in the picture, sister, brother, and brother-in-law, sister-in-law, and niece and nephews. And I am divorced, so Sadie's dad and I have remained friends, and especially having to go through the transplant, it was important for us to be on the same page. So, we're supporting our kids, and so that Sadie, obviously on the left, and Soren on the right. Sadie's now 25 and Soren's 22. This was taken actually at James's funeral. So that was almost 4 years ago. And so I wanted to say I can relate to the things everybody was saying. With Edie, I know we probably talked about this many years ago, that you've got to do what's right for your child in the hospital and not worry about what the doctors and nurses say. I found nurses that could be my advocate and encourage them to tell the other nurses, let's give Sadie some time, at night to sleep. Let's not worry about the diaper change, things like that. And then with Jennifer, we had feeding issues too. Not in the beginning, we had it after the Fontan. And still to this day, she doesn't have it's not appetite per se. She's just a very picky eater. And at the time when she was 2, about the only thing she would eat was French fries and macaroni and cheese. And those are still some of her favorite foods. She doesn't stray far from those childhood loves of food. So it's kind of funny. And then Dawn, I can relate to you with the transplant, having gone through that with her. And during the pandemic, oh my gosh, it's been really hard for her, because with the immune suppressants, she's terrified of getting COVID. And that's been our hardest thing right now, I would say. She knows what it's like to be intubated. She doesn't want to end up in the hospital intubated again. I mean, it's just awful. So that's a nutshell, very long story. I'd actually asked her today, I'll say one more thing. I asked her today, because my goal when she was a baby was to make sure that we didn't talk negatively about her heart condition, and that we focused on the positive and had things as normal as we could, and also to not make her think that she is at fault for any problems we had in our family. And I asked her today if she felt, okay about all that, and she said, yeah. She said, Mom, of course. So that was good reassurance.
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad that all of you were able to share as much as you were. And I know that Sherry has a few questions. So I'm going to mute my mic and let Sherry ask the questions. And if any of you have a question, you can, what's the best way for us to do this, Sherry? Should they send a message to you or should we just raise their hand? I think they can just raise their hand and you can call on them. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll start by saying that the questions that I have a few prepared questions that are meant to stimulate conversation. So, you know, they aren't specifically for the authors. They're more for people to answer in relation to the authors. So if you want to, if the authors of their essays want to add into anything that's said, please feel free to do so. But just raise your hand again, just because I want to be able to get to everybody and let everybody get a chance to talk. So does anybody, before we get started, does anybody have any questions? Okay, well, I'm gonna.
In the chat, there's a question in the chat.
If somebody wants to know how old Sadie is now. And is she 25, Holly?
Yes, she's 25. And as far as this question about the scar, she never, that I know, was embarrassed by it. She wore it as a badge of courage. She wears it still as a badge of courage.
Excellent. Is there a, hold on a second. Do the people listening, do you prefer to have all the facts about the condition that your child has, or was it better to rely on the medical team instead? Everybody's different about this, but I found that to be an important part of Holly's story. Edie?
Yeah, something that my ex and I found really frustrating when Michael was diagnosed and was in the hospital having his first surgery or getting prepared. He was 3 days old when he had his first. They didn't want to give us too much information because they thought it would scare us. And so we were desperate for information about his condition and, you know, what to expect and how we were going to have, you know, what was coming forward. And it was incredibly frustrating because basically they just dumped it all on us like the day before we left the hospital. Yeah, it was really frustrating because they kept saying it'd be too overwhelming. It would be and we were just desperate to get that information. We were doing all kinds of research ourselves, trying to figure things out because they were so unaccommodating.
I'm sorry that happened. What sorts of things did you do for your child to help them cope with upcoming procedures like Holly did? Anybody have anything to offer?
We were a member of PD Heart, an online support group. I think some of you are familiar with that.
I remember Anita from that, Rita and Anna. I think that's where we were all on that listserv, right? Yeah, like an email listserv.
Listserv, yeah. So I asked a lot of questions on there. And then when it came time for people who had not yet had the Fontan, for instance, I was able to answer questions for them. That was really, really helpful.
My daughter was 6 when she had her Fontan, and we took all of her favorite toys, and because we had to travel to Houston, which was about 300 miles from where we live, and I had read her stories. I forget the name of the book. Twiggy Goes to the Hospital or something like that, and we just talked to her about it. And actually, after she was in the recovery room, the nurse told us she was one of the most prepared kids for the surgery. So we had done what we could to, you know, that she wouldn't be afraid. And when we saw her, she was smiling. So we were surprised how awake and how well she was doing at that point. And that was just a little while after she came out of surgery. They'd already taken the tube out and everything. So that's what we did, or I did basically.
What gives you the confidence to advocate for your child? Anybody want to?
Holly.
I don't know. It just came naturally, I think. I think
you really helped me because you gave me the encouragement too.
Yeah, we had a good social worker, and we had a good clinical nurse specialist, who I think we grilled them for any information we could get that helped other families. And Anita, you were a big help. Thank you. And I don't know. I think I'm just the type of person that will speak her mind and just, yeah, I don't know.
Well,
I saw other families. I was so sad for the babies that didn't have people speaking up for them. I just felt so bad. And sometimes you could just see that those babies were not doing as well, you know?
You are so right. And I remember feeling like the dorm mom. I went around and knew all of the babies, and this was in the days before the HIPAA laws came into effect, and we had all open bays at University Hospital where Alex was. And I would go say hello to all of the babies, and I would say, your mama and daddy will be here soon. But a lot of them only came once a day if they did that. And so, yeah, I think those of us who were there, what was it? Shannon was saying, oh, we started advocating day one. Some of us, those of us who were there, Shannon, I would agree with you, but I think there were a lot of babies there who really didn't have an advocate.
There were a lot of babies that were in the same situation when I was there too, but whose parents had to work to maintain their insurance to even have their babies in the hospital. It was really crushing to think that they didn't have someone who could be with the babies all the time. Sad.
Yeah, I think FMLA started came into play around the time that Sadie was born. And I don't think people knew about it, that they could legally take time off of work, honestly.
Yeah,
You know,
I think you're right. I don't remember that even being much of an option when Alex was little. My son's 26, but those are the kinds of things that we needed to know about, right, ladies?
yes.
I think the whole insurance thing is very daunting for a lot of people, and I felt fortunate that I could advocate from the insurance standpoint, you know, but I was thinking how daunting that would be for folks that were not familiar with financial stuff or insurance at all, that you might just be, oh God, I'm stuck. I have no way to pay for this, you know, and not know that you actually have rights. And because I was on the phone constantly. I mean, those were in the days of different types of insurance, like in the early to mid 90s than there is now. So
yeah, things were different. I remember one of the most difficult things insurance wise for me is that from one hospital to the next, they code things differently. And so our insurance was not willing to pay for Alex's quote unquote, his shunt. They called that a prosthetic device. And they said, oh, we don't cover prostheses. And so it took us almost a year of writing letters and having Alex's surgeon say, this is not an extra foot. This is a device that goes inside the heart. And I don't know how many times we had to explain it, but they didn't want to cover that surgery because they said it was a prosthesis. So yeah, I don't know why don't they have uniform terminology from one hospital to the next? It would make it so much easier, but you know, they didn't do that surgery, and my sons local hospital. So we had to go to a hospital 3 hours away, and they just used different terminology.
We got turned down for insurance for Gabe. He had to go without
Oh my
any
God.
coverage for a
Oh,
period
wow.
of time.
We-
He had to go without coverage. He went on the state pool for people who are uninsurable eventually. But the insurance wrote to us and they said, we will cover you and we will cover your oldest son. We will not cover Gabriel. So he was
Wow.
not covered. He had nothing.
That's
We-
harsh.
We had exactly the opposite situation. My ex had a job with private insurance, and we actually got a nurse insurance like fairy godmother, if you will. She
Oh.
was our advocate, and she lined everything up. She made everything go smooth. She found ways for us to get, because I had to be out of state and I had two other
Wow.
kids at home. I was out of state for a month each time, and more than a month the last time. And she was a blessing for us. With Michael's first surgery was covered for all but $500, and his
Wow.
work kept changing their insurance, because the insurance was like, no, we are not going to do that anymore. And so he had 3 different insurances throughout the surgeries, but he also had something called AFLAC, and we got money per each stay to help with expenses as well. We got $5,000 the first time, $10,000 the second time, and $15,000 the third time, to help pay for all the expenses that had nothing to do with medical, but about places to stay and transportation and food and babysitters, because I had a 5-year-old and a 14-year-old at home, you know, that I still had to take care of, and I had to eat and stay someplace, you know, because they wouldn't let me stay when he was in ICU. I had to wait until he went down to the floor before I could stay with them. And yeah, it's expensive. So we were unbelievably blessed.
Wow. Well, ladies,
Good.
I cannot believe it. Our time is already up. We've gone over just by a couple of minutes. I try to keep it as tight to 1 hour as possible, because I know some people have dinner and stuff, but wow, this was amazing. We actually got to talk about quite a few different topics, and I love how we had the chat going too. So some people were sharing information in the chat as well. Since all of you said it was okay for me to record this and to put it up on YouTube, in case you missed something or you want to hear something again, I'll be putting it up as soon as I can, and I'll put a note on Facebook about that. But I want to thank Sherry, our moderator. Thank you so much for coming up with some questions and for being the moderator. Let's give her some applause. Yay!
Thank you all for being so open about yourselves. And I think that takes a lot of courage and strength itself.
It really,
So,
really does. Yeah.
I think it's almost a driven thing when you go through something like this, that you want it to be of value and use to other people. You've gone through it, and you want other people to benefit from that experience that you've had.
yeah.
For sure. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you. I'm so
Round of applause for Anna.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, this has been so much fun. And I love seeing the pictures of the older kids. And you know what? I even enjoyed seeing the picture of Michael's gravesite, because I know that marker, that was a work of art, that was a labor of love for you to get it, Edie. And I'm so glad I got a chance to see it, and it's so meaningful to me. And I had tears while I was putting it together. Poor Mary and I were crying as we're putting together this slideshow, and it's just so great. Thank you, Mary, for coming and for helping out.
Mary did a beautiful job with the slideshow.
Yeah, Mary, you were awesome. Let me see if I can get the view so we can see everybody. Where are you, Mary? Wave to everybody.
Here.
Mary. She's my new assistant.
Hello.
She's a heart
Thank
warrior.
you.
Thank
Of
you.
course. Glad you guys liked it.
Thank you.
I love you all, and I'm so glad you could come. I hope you'll come next week, where we'll be featuring some other artists. But first, let's, Sherry, let's congratulate all of our artists all of our authors who came tonight. Edie, let's give her a round of applause. Yay, Edie. And Dawn. Yay, Dawn. Where's Dawn? Wave to everybody, Dawn. I got the good pleasure. John and I got a chance to go on TV together in San Antonio a million years ago. That was really
Shiloh was there too.
Yeah, Shiloh.
Oh,
was there.
Shiloh.
Shiloh.
That's right, Shiloh. You were in San Antonio there. We all had our babies on our laps. Can you imagine doing that now, girls? So cool. That's right. And Jennifer, let's give Jennifer a round of applause. Yeah, Jennifer.
Thank
Jennifer,
you.
this is the first time for me to talk to you like this. So this is really, really cool for me. And then, of course, last but not least, Holly. Yay, Holly. Good job, Holly. This was so much fun. Thank you so much. Anita, thanks for coming back. Rita, thanks for coming back. It's so great. And Shannon, so nice to see you and talk to you tonight. You guys are all awesome. I know that we have a couple of other people here who didn't talk, and that's okay. Dot, thank you for coming. Dot's a podcast friend of mine. So it's so awesome to see you too, Dot. And thank you so much, ladies. I hope you have a great weekend and happy Congenital Heart Defect Awareness Day to all of you.
Same to you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.